I win! Hey there, fellow maker. Welcome to the shop. Another season of Game of Thrones is upon us. And I want to make something from the series, and I wanted to make something that'd be a good beginner project for new foamsmiths out there. So we're making a dragon egg. Not a whole lot more introduction needed. Why don't we head over to the computer so I can make a pattern? There are a variety of ways you can make your template, but we're going to use some 3D software to make the template of our egg. This is Blender. 3D modeling and animation software. It's totally free. This is going to be super duper simple. Blender launches with a cube. Going to hit delete. I don't need that. I'm going to go over here and create a UV sphere, and this is in the correct orientation. I want fewer segments though. These segments here I can change to 6. It's going to be super low poly. There's a good reason for that. It looks really low poly, but this, trust me, this is exactly what we want. Now that my sphere is created, I'm going to use the numpad here to hit 5 to go to orthographic, and then 4? No, 3? There we go. So I have a nice side profile, and I'm just going to tweak this a tiny bit. And I have a picture of a dragon egg that I can use to kind of get the proportions correct. To edit this, I can change object mode to edit mode, and then I can grab vertices or edges or faces if I want to, or I can hit A to hit none or all of them. I'm going to use all of them, hit S for scale, so I can scale it, and then hit Z to scale it in the Z direction. So I'm just trying to get this profile to match kind of this profile here. Just getting it close. We're going to do tons of foam work on top of this, but that I think looks pretty good. I'm going to go back to object mode, and now I have my very rough egg shape, and I can export this as an OBJ file. So I'm going to go to File, Export, OBJ. And then I can go save that file wherever I want. So now we're going to take that 3D file and dump it into Pepakura Designer. This is a paid program, but it's 30 bucks, and if you do any kind of Pepakura work, it's well worth it. I'm going to open that file, my egg mesh. In this case, this should be gray. So I'm going to hit flip, and it'll make it all gray, turns it inside out for me. Then this is, in fact, the front, so I'm going to say good. And then the scale, this is where we can decide how big our egg should be. And I have a ruler. And I'm going to guess my egg should be about yay tall, maybe? That seems about right for a dragon egg. So let's say 220 millimeters tall. Like so. I can hit OK. And that is our egg. All I have to do now is unfold it. And Pepakura Designer will try and make the best combination for us, but we can tweak it a little bit by modifying the edges. So I can cut apart a good chunk like that, and then I can use the move tool to move all of these out of the way, because I really only need the one, because they are all the same. I can rotate this around, and I have one page of my pattern right there. Now I could just print this out and use it to make my pattern. Yeah, we can turn the gray off like that. We can turn the tabs off, or the flaps. We don't need the tabs, that's okay. And this is the rough pattern. I'm just gonna print it out and we can get to work with the foam. I'm just darkening these lines to make them a little easier to see. My printer printed this quite light. The other thing, these horizontal lines can be used as registration for when I glue this whole thing together. So that's going to help us out. I've also got some packing tape here so I can cover this piece of paper to make it a little more durable, because we're going to use this 6 times. And we'll do another registration there, and then let's do up here. That's our pattern. Just try and cut this out nice and evenly. The places where I added registration lines, I'm going to notch out with my handy pattern notcher. This will help us later when we're gluing this whole thing together. Like I said, I'm making this out of foam, and this gives me a perfect excuse to try out some of this HD foam that our buddy SKS left here, our buddy Steve. He's got new foam that he's selling at his website. This is 6 millimeters thick, and I think it'll do very well for our egg. I'm gonna make 6 of these, and I can just go over this with a ballpoint pen. I like to put a weight on my patterns to keep them from sliding around while I do this work. You could pin it, but frequently that little pinhole will come back to haunt you later when you try to make a nice smooth surface. So I tend to prefer to just use a weight. And I'm definitely going in and making sure that I mark these notches where I'm going to register these parts together. Time to cut out our foam. This template, this pattern, along with the dragon scales, I'll make those available for free to download if you'd like to follow along. But for now, I need to liberate all of this foam so I can cut out all of my egg parts, like so. Let's get to cutting. The most important thing here, two important things. One, keep your blade perpendicular. You don't want it tilting left or right. And then cut as close to that line as you can. And if you can get this in one pass, the better. That's really, really nice. I'm trying out this ceramic blade. Seems to work really well, although I did find it is about 40 times more expensive than the cheap steel blades. But it does cut foam oh so nicely. Just like so. All right, all I have to do is cut out 5 more. To get our egg a little more rounded, we're going to pre-form this with a little bit of heat in my Evil Ted Smith branded foam anvil. This will help it get to that rounded egg shape a lot better than just gluing it together. You can see how this is starting to create more of a domed shape in our piece there. There's a fresh one, and this is the pre-rounded one. There we go. Next thing we're doing is putting glue on all the edges. I'm using contact cement for this. So I'll put a layer on everything and let it dry for 5 minutes, and I can stick everything together. I like to brush from the inside to the outside so that the outer edge gets glue all the way to the edge. If I miss a spot on the inside and there's a tiny gap there, we'll never see it, so I'm not worried about that. So what I'll usually do is brush a good layer on and then kind of clean it up a little bit like that. So that's one down, and I'll go brush the rest of them while this one dries. Oh, those touched. As I brushed on my glue, the first pieces have dried, and I think one layer of glue will be enough. So I can start putting them together and lining up all my registration lines. You know, this egg pattern, obviously perfect for my dragon egg here, but I bet there are plenty of other props that are egg-shaped that this pattern would be good for. If you can think of one, like another prop that this template would work for, let me know in the comments. I'd love to see some brainstorming down there. You can see as I'm pressing this together, it's starting to make more of that dome shape that we want. And that pre-heat forming that we did really helps it along the way. I'm also gonna put this together in 2 halves. I'm not gonna just keep adding one piece onto another. I'm gonna make half of it, and then I'm gonna make the other half, and then I'll stick those 2 halves together. Just laying a piece of masking tape in here to keep this side from touching before I'm ready. There we go, that way I can press this side together without worry of the other side getting glued in some weird way. You know what? I think I need to brush on more glue. See how that's coming apart? All right, I'm gonna brush another layer of glue on these. If barge sits for too long, it will stop sticking. So I'm gonna just hedge my bets here and add another layer of glue. Oh, that really stuck down to the barge, didn't it? That stuck to the barge. All right, let me get some more glue. It's been another 5 minutes and our second layer of barge is dry, so I can stick it together. And instead of putting tape on this side, I just have a piece of paper towel tacked down. There we go. So now it won't stick together on that side, and it also won't get taped to the glue. Waka, 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 waka. There we go. Press that together. That looks pretty all right. And hopefully I can pull this out. No problem. Keep this crazy train rolling. All right. I can go around and press all my seams together. But I just made myself a Nerf football! Touchdown! Just like that, but a few minutes later, and we have ourselves the base for our dragon egg. And I'm pretty happy with it. The next thing I need to do is figure out all the scales that are gonna come down over the top. This is a photo reference of, I think, an officially licensed dragon egg from Game of Thrones. And I printed it out about the same scale, so I can take a pattern off of them, and they should be the right size. To do that, I'm gonna put down more packing tape over the area that I want to pattern, so that when I lay down my masking tape, it'll peel off without wrecking the printout. And then I'm gonna take this thin masking tape, it's thin enough to kind of see through, and I'm gonna put it over that part. Now I can kind of see through that, but if I go hold this up to a window, I should be able to see it even better. The windows didn't work. There's no sun out in Seattle today, but I have this crazy bright LED panel, so I'm gonna use that. Now these are irregular and they go around the surface, so I wanna kind of figure out how they go. I may have to straighten these out later, but this is a good start for this to get the scale correct, make sure that they're the right size. And then what I'm also gonna do is connect them along the top and make sure that the next layer of scales here will overlap that line so that we don't see the gap. This way, instead of cutting out individual scales, I'll cut out a whole strip of them. Hopefully that'll work out. This should peel off easily, yeah. It also seems like the scales on top are a little smaller, so what I might do is use this to make sort of a standard set of these dragon scales, and then I'll probably dump them in the computer and trace a vector of them, and make a bunch of different ones and a bunch of different sizes, because I don't want these all to look identical. And they're kind of rounded. They don't really have that fine of a point on them. And then the top needs to be up here. You know what I'll do is I'll take my cell phone, snap a photo of that so I can throw it into Inkscape, and I'll make a vector of it. Boop, there we go. Merp. I quickly traced everything in Inkscape just to be able to repeat the pattern a bit, and I also made 3 different sizes. I figured as we go up the egg it'll get smaller, but I'm gonna cut one of these out first to test and make sure that it looks right before I commit to cutting out a whole bunch of these. There we go. I'm gonna use my pattern to make a bunch of scales. In fact, I can reuse this pattern over and over to get a repeating pattern. I'm just gonna trace it on here and then move it down and trace it some more. This is 2mm foam, super easy to cut with just an X-Acto knife. So I'm just gonna go down the whole length of this here and cut out all my dragon scales. Not too bad. If that were to be cut here, and we overlap them, we could do that. Okay, so here's getting the points to line up so that they're splitting the difference, may be a little tricky, but we can take these longer strips of foam that we've cut out and cut them and slide them apart a little bit. The intersection will be hidden, so I think that'll work. Did a quick test, and I think I know the next order of operations. The thing I want to avoid is the scales laying too flat. I don't want them to be perfectly flat. I want them to have a little bit of dimension, and I also don't want the edges to be perfectly sharp. So I have a plan. I'm going to use the stone bit and my rotary tool to kind of round over all the edges on here, and then I'm going to heat these up and curve them a little bit on my foam anvil. Got a couple different bits to work with here. This stone bit is really good for sort of polishing foam, getting rid of the fuzzies, but I need to be a little bit more aggressive. So I've got this 220 grit sanding drum in there. I'm gonna use that to round over all of the edges, just on the one side. To give our scales a little more dimension, I'm gonna heat form them. And this heat gun, it's not a crazy expensive one. I just got it from Harbor Freight, but it's got a stand on it, so I can leave it there running, and then I can do this, and then I can heat form it. Then the next one, and so on and so on. This line is where I'm going to put my glue, but when I place the scales on for reels, I'll do them in a little bit more of a haphazard pattern. But at least now I know generally where the glue should go. Speaking of glue,
I'm just putting glue on the top back portion of our scales here.
our barge is dry on both sides, so it's time to start sticking it down. And like I said, I can be a little bit irregular or random with where this goes, and this will help mix up the arrangement of scales. So it doesn't look like we're just repeating the same, like what, 6 of them over and over again. You can also stretch the foam quite a bit, so if you need to stretch or compress it, you've got some options. One of the many reasons why I love foam. Let's do this. We'll have another scale overlapping that, so we don't need to worry about that mess. Now these are loose, and I may tack them down with a little bit of glue, but again, I don't want them to lay flat. So I don't want to just put glue on the back of these and squish it flat. So I'm gonna maybe deal with that later, but let's get another row on there and see how it looks. I was about to trace out and cut a whole another set of these, but then Brittany said, why don't you just use the one you already cut? And I said, that's why I married you, because you're a smart lady. So I'm just gonna kind of mark how thick this ought to be, and then cut it out. And there's another row of dragon scales. Ta-da! Work smarter, not harder. At this point, it makes a lot of sense to use something to hold your egg. In this case, my tape worked perfectly. And now I'm gonna lay down the next layer of scales. Well, really, I'm just gonna kind of figure out where they ought to go. So it's gotta go low enough so that you don't see that gap, and so that the tip will cover up that layer. And we can do the same thing. Now this next one will be a little bit different because I'm gonna have to cut this into pieces to get it to stretch or compress. But again, that's fine. The cuts will be here where they will eventually be hidden, like that one. The glue is ready to go. And my only real concern here is just making sure that I get this to bridge the gap between the two below it. So I can stretch it a little bit if I have to, which is really helpful. A little bit of a line. We'll see how that goes once we put the next layer on, if that over time will sort of fix itself. Well, I need to sharpen this blade. That looks pretty okay. So the next layer will go over the top of it, like that. Where this layer is overlapping that layer, the rear edge of it is creating this sort of ridge. Now, I don't think it's gonna be too much of a problem once we layer more pieces on top, but just to save myself the heartache of it potentially not working, I'm gonna come in and just bevel this edge down, just sort of smooth it over a little bit. Just like that, so that when another layer goes on top of it, it's not gonna have that really hard crease right there. There's the edge I beveled, so now when I lay this down, the next layer, it's a little bit more of a smoother transition right there. Now this needs to go further that way. So I could stretch it or cut it, just move it over a little bit. That gap is fine, we'll bevel it just like we did before, and then the next row of scales will cover it. I've done, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of the larger scales, and now I'm moving to the medium scales. They're just a little bit smaller, but same thing. I've got a whole strip of them ready to go, and I'm just gonna glue them down and cover up the previous layer. So this is the 6th layer of medium size scales, and I think this will be the last. I think we'll go to the smaller ones after this. It's definitely going a lot quicker now as we approach the dome. I have swapped over to the smaller scales. I think I did 4 rows of the large ones, 6 of the medium, and then however many of the smalls we're gonna need. So I'm just gluing on the first layer here. I figured I could take this opportunity to remind you that I have books about making costumes and props out of foam. The Foamsmith 1 and Foamsmith 2, whoops, whoop, look at that. Both available at our website or on Amazon, especially if you're out of the country or out of America. We have it available in Canada, on Amazon, and in the UK. So if you want to get some more foam costume and prop knowledge in your brain, Foamsmith books are the best place for it. I think we're having a sale this week. In fact, today, starting today, over at punishprops.com, we're having a sale. So if you have been waiting for a good time to get your hands on these books, now is the best time to do it. Or even better, if you're looking for something to give that special cosplayer in your life, head on over to punishprops.com and grab yourself a copy of the Foamsmith book today, available in both print and digital forms. As we get closer to the top, I'm having to bend this around it more, so I'm getting some of these wrinkles. Some of them I can just kind of press into the foam, and then when I Dremel that, I'll make it nice and smooth, but some of them are a bit much, so I'll just do that and then do that. And again, I'll come back with the Dremel and clean that up. As we approach the top of our egg, I took one of the strips of scales I had and I cut it into smaller pieces. I'll have to trim these even more, but I figure having the control of one at a time will be handy, because I'm gonna have to do a little jigsaw puzzle at the top of this thing. Whew, it's getting tricky to do this. Kind of trace the top layer onto a piece of tape, and then I'm gonna draw sort of a flattened version of that that'll go in between them. The next couple of layers I'm gonna cut out like this out of one piece of 2mm foam until I end up with like a hat. Got a nice fresh piece of 2mm foam. I'm gonna stick that down. There we go. I'll round all the edges on that, but that's gonna go kind of like that, or kind of wish I had remembered which way this goes. Now I can stick this thing on, making sure I cover all of the lines. Maybe just one more of those and then a little cap, and we'll be good. This last one here, I'm gonna use super glue to tack it down. That way I don't end up bathing the entire thing in contact cement. And I am just kind of winging it up here. I'm not sure what it's supposed to look like in the actual prop from the TV show, so we'll just playing it kind of fast and loose. And that's okay. Oh, you stay down, there we go. I made 5 more little 2mm foam scales to cap everything off. I have no idea if that's what the one in the show looked like, but I'm rolling with it. Carefully place each one at a time. Ta-da! That is one handsome looking dragon egg. A few more things to do before we get on to sealing and painting. These scales can still sort of flip up a little bit. I'm gonna seal this whole thing, which should keep them in place, but I'm gonna go over with my super glue and tack any of the ones down that look like they might wanna get away. I don't wanna grab this thing and have a dragon scale fold up like that. So that guy in particular, I'll just put a little dab of super glue on there, and then stick him down I'm just gonna go over the whole thing and tack down any of the ones that I'm worried might be a problem. The next phase of Operation Dragon Egg will be to add a texture to the bottom part. There's this heavily textured part here. We're gonna both carve some in with a rotary tool, and then we'll go in when we seal it and add some more texture then. But for now, I'm going to use this round stone bit to kind of give it a little bit of a hammered texture. That'll also help me go in and grind out the seam lines there so that we won't see those anymore. Just sanding away some of the fuzzies. I'll hit this with a torch. That'll really get rid of them, but just kind of smoothing that out. That seemed to do a pretty good job of concealing that seam for us. Now this isn't exactly the right texture, but it does help sell it a little bit better. It's time to seal this fella, and to hold it, I'm gonna hang it, and I've got a piece of wire here. I'm gonna just poke a hole in the top, and then hopefully poke a hole somewhere near the bottom. Kind of near the bottom. I can just bend that over like that so it won't come out. And now I can hang it, which means I can hit it with a torch, I can spray it if I have to, or I can brush things on it if I have to. All the sanding and especially the grinding that I did left us with some little fuzzy bits on there. And to get rid of those, I'm just gonna hit it very quickly with a blowtorch.
That's raising the scales.
Oh, pro tip, blowtorch was not necessary on the scales. In fact, it made a whole bunch of them curl up. I really only needed it down here. So now I'm gluing some more scales back down. For the sealing, I'm using Mod Podge, just brushing it everywhere. Now I'll do several layers. This first one is really just to make sure I get everything covered, and I'll use a lot of it. Then we'll let it dry, and then we'll do a couple more, and we'll try and use it to add more texture down here. But this first layer is really just to get everything covered. Trying to force glue, or the Mod Podge down into, in between all the scales. I don't want there to be any gaps. If I can get that to fill those gaps a little bit, that'd be great. I've added a second layer of Mod Podge here and let it dry, mostly. I'm trying something to get more irregular texture down here. This is Quick Seal. We usually use it to fill in seams on foam, but it's really thick, and I want to use it to kind of add another layer of texture to our egg here. And because it's so thick, it's leaving a relief. Anyway, I've got a wet sponge here to sort of knock the peaks down a little bit. I don't want it to be pokey, but I do want it to be a little bit weird and irregular. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. That looks kind of cool. So I'm just gonna go over the whole thing like that, just add a little bit more texture, and then we can let it dry. That looks all right. I think it'll work for us. I gotta let that dry though. Then we can start painting. Here's our beautiful egg. I hit it with a coat of primer. All I had was white primer, so that's what I went with. Gave it a little time to dry. Now it's time to start painting. And I've decided to go with the red dragon egg. So I'm gonna do a base coat of a dark red, but I've also got these pearl powder pigments that I wanna put in there to give it a little bit, hopefully, of a metallic sheen. Boop. There we go, nice dark red. That'll be a nice base coat, and then we're gonna put a bunch of this powder in there. This is probably gonna thicken it. I may have to add a little bit of airbrush medium to thin this out again. This will thin it down a little bit. Those powders definitely thickened it. That looks pretty good though. All right, I'll load that in my airbrush and do our base coat. Our base coat is mostly dry. I gave it about an hour to dry, enough that I can handle, and it's time to add the rest of the layers of paint. I printed out a reference. This is kind of what I'm going for here. And I'm gonna start by layering some paint down on the bottom. Now this is mostly yellow, but I'm gonna do a base coat of brown, and then when I go over that with some yellow and gold, it'll give it some nice contrast. So I've got my heavy body acrylic paints and my paintbrushes, and I'm gonna get to work. I'm gonna thin it with a little bit of water. I'm just sort of scrubbing this into the surface. It doesn't need to be a fully covered layer. If some of that red's peeking through, that's fine. Like I said, we're gonna add yellow and gold on top of this. So we just want to darken this layer. And it's okay if I don't get it perfect up here because there's gonna be some more layers on top of it. So it doesn't need to perfectly line up with the edge of the scales there. Also, a nice thin layer like this that's been watered down should dry really fast. I think I want to do another pass like that because there's still quite a lot of red sneaking through. There's also a brush hair. Get out of there. There we go. Going for a little more coverage this time. With the hair dryer, I was able to dry this enough to be able to touch it so that I can hold it while I paint the rest of it and set it in my holder. Now I have to mix up the color that's going to kind of go from the top to the bottom here, which is a very dark red. So I'm going to mix red in with my brown paint that I already have in there. I'm going to throw some of this pearl powder in there to give it a little bit of a shine, just like we did with the base coat. Just a little bit of that black, not a ton. I don't want to destroy this color. I'm just kind of scrubbing the surface and getting the highlights. One of the weird things about this egg is that the low spots between these scales are brighter. That's why when I added the brown, it was almost like dry brushing. I was trying not to fill the crevices, which normally if you were weathering something, you'd want to fill those. So I'm going to actually do that on the top here. It looks like the crevices are all filled in. So I've got just some black paint that I watered down, and I'm going to go do a wash. Actually, add a little bit more water to that. Just do a thin wash to fill in the cracks and crevices on the top of this, like I would normally weather, you know, a space gun or something. And then go in and clean it up a little bit with a paper towel. I kind of want a little bit more of a black wash over the whole thing, and this may be enough for that. If it's not, I can go back over it with another like dry brush pass with a little bit of black. This is also going to fall off. I only want this wash on kind of the top up here. Time to do the yellow down here. I want it to be a little bit golden, so I've got some gold, got my yellow, and a little bit of white to make this a little bit more pastel. That looks pretty close, just hitting the highlights. And what's interesting is the spots that are still red on here from my wash are the highlights. And those will get covered by the yellow. Shoo! It's my best Bob Ross. And this kind of creeps up into the scales a little bit, so don't feel bad if you end up getting some up there. I think I might come back with a little bit of gold and just highlight a couple spots later. This looks pretty close. I like how it looks anyway. Last thing I want to do, the very last touch, I got just some gold all by itself, and I'm going to go over some of this yellow just to give it a little bit more of a shine. Just highlighting it so it's got a nice bit of shine here and there. And I'm just grazing the highlights. And this should be the very last step. It's kind of warm. Weird. There is our dragon egg, all made out of EVA foam. Should be able to tackle it in just one day. The templates that I made for this will be linked down below for free if you want to give it a try, along with all of the tools and materials that I use, including this sweet foam that I got from my buddy, Stephen K. Smith, over at SKSprops.com. Thanks for the foam, Steve. This is a wonderful beginner project if you're looking to get into foam smithing for the first time, not a lot of materials, and you can modify it to be a variety of different egg-shaped things, or of course for Game of Thrones, you could paint it one of the 3 colors of dragon eggs that they have, or go crazy and make all 3. I'd like to thank our supporters, both on Patreon, and you can support us down in YouTube. There's the membership button if you want to join. Both of those options give you access to all of our behind the scenes content, all of our extra credit content. In fact, we're going to call that all together now the Extra Credit Club. So if you want to join the Extra Credit Club, whether it's on Patreon or YouTube or any future crowdfunding thing, we have a website for that linked down below, or you can hit the button down below on YouTube, or of course, head on over to our Patreon page. Thank you for the support. You literally help make all of this happen. We'll see you in the next build. I win! I definitely obliterated this egg.
You Hulk smashed it.
We're gonna be finding eggs for months.
Shoulders?
Shoulders. Whoops. Nope. Oh, there it goes. Nailed it. Poop. Oh. Nice. Thumbnail? There it is, thumbnail.